So today we're going to talk about greenhouses, and you have one in your garden, which we can, I assume this is a picture of your
Do.
garden in the background.
It
This is a
is.
picture of your
Yeah.
greenhouse. So when did you, how long ago did you build the greenhouse, and why did you build it?
So this has been in my garden for about 5 years. And it's a walk-in polytunnel. It's 14 by 24 feet. It was a polytunnel kit. And I mean, I've had structures, walk-in structures before. I think I got my first one when I was probably about 17, and it was literally like a metal like tent structure covered in like clear poly, and it was like $150 from a local store,
I
and it
see.
was flimsy. But I still got to start seedlings in it. I got to start my plants, like putting them out 6-8 weeks earlier. So it did teach me that the power of having that level of protection in a garden. So when it was time to put a new structure in my existing garden, I wanted something that was big enough that it was going to provide us with lots of food all winter long. And I can tell you that when you're looking at greenhouses, if you can afford it in your budget, go as big as you can, because you will use up every square inch of that space.
Right, right.
I was overwhelmed when we covered it, and I walked in and I'm like, how am I going to fill this up? Well, it took a week, right?
Took a week.
And now I'm like, geez, I should have gotten 2 of these end to end. But so
Yeah.
I chose this structure because it was designed locally by a greenhouse expert that had been working in the field for over 40 years. And I had worked with him. I knew his work. I knew his knowledge base. And
Right.
he designed this structure. It's a professional grade greenhouse designed for a homeowner like me. And I knew it would, take hurricanes and nor'easters and
It
snow
looks like a
loads.
very
So
like sound,
yeah,
elegant design with the dome structure, right?
it
So
is.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
works. And then I paid a bit extra for the front to be polycarbonate instead of just soft poly, because I wanted it to look nice in my backyard as well.
Uh,
But totally worth it.
so when you say polycarbonate, you mean like a plexiglass kind of thing?
Yeah, so
I
it's a
see.
twin wall Lexan polycarbonate. So it's got,
Ah,
yeah,
Lexan.
two layers with
I
air
see.
pockets in between, which
Oh,
also increases the heat retention of the structure.
yeah. So you get the extra
Yeah.
insulation with that.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, like you probably, I would have loved a glass greenhouse, something beautiful and gothic and stylish. But when I compared the price per square foot for a glass greenhouse compared to my polytunnel, at the time when I bought it like 5 years ago, it was about, $2,500 for the polytunnel versus the glass greenhouse estimate I got was 160,000 for the same
wow,
size. So I was like,
that's like a fancy cottage.
Yeah, I
So
would
yeah,
live there.
very
Yeah.
fancy. Actually, my
Yeah.
first house
Mine
was
too.
my first house, which we bought in 2004, was cheaper than that.
Yeah, yeah, mine too. And we bought ours in 2001, and I'm still living in it. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Well, you got in at the right time, I'll tell you.
I
Because
know, eh? Can't leave
last couple
now.
of years not so good. You're not going exactly. It's like who should have a greenhouse? Is it right for everyone? Like, is it? Sometimes I think because my
Mhm.
garden is so big, a 2,500 square foot garden, it kind of makes
Yeah.
sense to have it would complement it to have a greenhouse. And every year I think
Mm.
about it, and then I just say, oh, screw it, and I don't do it. But
Yeah.
yeah, how did you decide to get one other than being a, famous garden person and all that sort of having a big garden and having a garden
Well,
show and stuff? But,
well, I mean, I wanted one because it was one of my goals. Like have used them before, I've gardened in them before, and the goals that I had for my garden was to increase my year-round harvesting. Of course, I use cold frames, I use mini hoop tunnels, I use deep mulching, I use cloches, so I use lots of other little structures. But I wanted to really up my garden game and go bigger, and I wanted to increase, how much food we produce in a year. So the fact that was one of my garden goals. So I would think about, if you're kind of weighing the options, well, evaluate what are your garden goals? Like, what do you want to
right,
get out of your garden? So
right.
a walk-in structure, whether it's a greenhouse or a polytunnel like mine or a geodesic dome, there's one actually just across the street from me,
That
just
sounds
well in the other
cool.
neighborhood. It
Yeah,
is amazing. It's featured in my book, Growing Undercover.
right,
I mean, it allows you to get a serious head start on spring by depending on the structure, by months or even just a couple weeks if it's just a smaller tent-like structure like I started with. We live in a cold climate. The way that I've been able to grow peppers, eggplants, melons, tomatoes, it's 6 weeks earlier in spring and the 6 weeks earlier start to the harvest. I'm still harvesting tomatoes now from my unheated structure, and it's mid to late October, and I've already had 4 hard frosts. So that doesn't usually happen here in Nova Scotia. I'm
yeah.
still harvesting peppers and eggplants in there, and ground cherries, and other types of warm season vegetables. Again,
Wow.
no heat in there. It's also a really comfortable working environment. I mean, I've been using cold frames for 25 years, But going up in February, to harvest greens from a cold frame, it can be a little wet and cold and damp and whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you'll walk in your greenhouse. Like the first year, I think I did live in there. Like I worked up there. The Wi-Fi goes up there. I wrote a book in there. I mean, I'd have tea every day up there. I mean, I was in there all the time because it's always, even in cold winter, usually if it's sunny out, it's above freezing and it's mild.
Right.
Um, and then if you're
Wow.
thinking about how much food you want to produce, well, a cold frame is great. I love my frames, but they produce, a small amount of food in a 3 foot by 6 foot frame or a 3 foot by 4 foot frame, whereas a greenhouse, so much more space. So, and of
Yeah,
course, it can be flexible. Like in my greenhouse, I have two raised beds along the sides. I have a little patio in the back because again, I want to sit there. And then in the middle, it's like empty space. But normally, like right now, it's full of grow bags, which had vertical tomatoes and things like that are still going.
I
Cucumbers are
see.
done. But I could take those grow bags out. I could put in another, raised bed there, or I could change how I do it every year. So it gives me flexibility to adjust the design inside the structure. So
I see.
it's been fantastic. You got
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
it.
Yes. I just got, if I could find
Yeah.
someone, just give me one for free, a sponsor. I'm sure maybe we could chat Vessi Seeds up and maybe they'll do me a solid.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do they have structures? I have no idea.
I had a lot of stuff. I don't know,
Oh,
but I
mm,
mean, boy, they got like rototillers and all kinds of stuff. So I wouldn't be
yeah. And I
surprised if
mean,
they had something.
there's certainly there's a lot of different structures out there. So and we can talk about this as we go along, but just make sure you pick one that meets your needs. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And the growing conditions where you live, and the seasons you want to use it. So a flimsy structure is probably going to be more of a headache
Right.
than a help.
I think I'd probably want something at least 6'6" at the peak because I'm 6'4".
Okay,
So,
yeah.
so I'd be all hunched over.
You
And I've got
definitely
my,
would. Yeah, yeah.
I've,
Mine,
I've
because
got
mine
my.
is 9 feet, I think, in the middle, 10
Oh,
feet, 10 feet
nice!
maybe.
Wow,
Yeah.
you
So
could do
yeah.
jumping jacks in there. It's perfect.
I have. I use I need a ladder, for when as summer goes on for harvesting the tomatoes at the top, or still training them vertically and pinching out suckers and stuff. I have a little step ladder I use.
This is perfect because that's my very next question. So let's segue. Um,
Yeah.
so the question was, do you use it for anything? I always think of a greenhouse as like this thing that you grow stuff in like March and April,
Right.
and then you move stuff into it in September so that it can continue to go. What
Mm.
do you use it for during the height of summer? I think it's July and August when it's so hot. Do you have things
It is
going?
so
What,
hot.
what what's going on in the greenhouse at the height of summer?
It is. I like to fill, like when I give talks, I have some photos I show of my greenhouse that are, and I can send you some, Greg, if you want to pop them into the show notes if people want to see them. So,
Sure.
like, in spring, I've got the side beds planted with greens and quick growing root crops, like, new baby carrots and baby beets and turnips. But then in summertime, I put those, again, the grow bags down the middle. And I have 16 feet of grow bags I use. They're filled with a mix, of course, of some good high quality potting mix, as well as lots of manure and some organic fertilizers. And then the tomatoes get tucked in there, usually late April, early May. And I get such a head start on the season. By the time the ones that go in the garden are going out, the other ones in the greenhouse are like 2 feet tall. So,
Wow.
I grow lots of heat lovers in there, and every square inch of the vertical space is used up by midsummer because the tomatoes are like 9 feet tall at that point. The cucumbers and melons I grow down the middle are growing vertically, and they've reached the ceiling and are branching off, and I'm adding other little like, twine and strings for them to climb up on. Cucamelons grow in there. I also overwinter artichokes. As you
Right.
probably know, our season here is not hot enough for artichokes, which are
Oh,
zone 8, maybe
right.
7B. But in my greenhouse, they overwinter. So I get artichokes starting in early May, late April, and they're like giant, like beautiful globe artichokes.
Wow.
So I do overwinter some tender things in there. But of course, I'm growing, vegetables in there all the time. But in summer, even though you think you wouldn't want it, it is just packed with vegetables. And, we get an early start to that harvest of the warm season crops, the eggplants, the peppers, again, the melons, tomatoes, cucumbers. I do grow a few zucchini in there as well, just for fun. And then that keeps going. Like I said, there's still tomatoes there now in mid to late October. So it's pretty phenomenal what it does in the garden.
I was going to ask you, I had a question, your plastic versus glass, but I think we
Mm.
already figured that out given that it's about a 10-to-1 price differential. So I think glass
Well,
is probably not, it's so
yeah.
expensive that you use glass if money is no object.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, glass is definitely, it has better light transmission. Like a single layer of glass, the problem with a single layer of glass is that It doesn't hold heat very well, so it's not very energy efficient. It's also breakable. Glass,
Yes.
even though it lets a lot of light in, it's very breakable. So if you have any trees nearby, if you got kids playing with baseballs, glass, if it breaks, it's just no fun
And
trying to
pesky
replace
teenagers
that.
with the long hair and the rock and roll music. Yes. Um,
Terrible, isn't it? Golly. Yeah. So, I mean, if you had double paneled glass, that's more energy efficient, but it's I think that'd be the most
yeah.
expensive greenhouse. So, you can buy, you have poly, like my poly on my polytunnel is greenhouse poly. It's rated for 4 years. It's UV treated, so it doesn't break down in the light. And I'm hoping it's already 5 years old. I'm hoping to get one more year out of it before I replace it. But you can also use, like you mentioned earlier, polycarbonate, the hard plastics. You can get single layer, you can get twin wall, like I have on the end of my polytunnel. You can get triple layer, you can even get 5 layer. So the higher, though, the more layers you have, the less light can pass through it. So you are
right.
losing some of that light, of course, which is okay if you're in a hot climate and you're trying to maybe grow things not so hot. But here, twin wall is what I would want to go with.
I see. Well, and I think, like, even with my plastic domes that I just put over my garden
Yeah.
beds, so I can sort of turn each bed into something like a cold frame.
Yep.
Um, I find, I mean, that's just 6 mil poly that you get at a hardware store for using in the walls of a house, right?
Mm.
And I find they last about 5 years. Then you have to start putting little bits of like tape on them to tack up, almost like a guy who's shaved, with all the little bits of toilet paper.
Yep.
So they start to look unsightly, but you can squeeze an extra year or two out of them. So if you
Easily.
can if you can get 5 years out of that,
As
which is
long as
not
it's UV
not built,
stabilized. Yeah.
when it's not. I mean, it's meant to be inside a wall, so it doesn't
I'm
have any of those
surprised.
properties, right? So and you've got like that, it's not steep, it's sort of flat, so the
Yeah.
ice cakes on. It gets a real beating, but I squeeze about 5 years, so I wouldn't be surprised if you get double what it's guaranteed at. We'll have to
I,
see,
I'm
but
I'm being careful with it. So
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
hope so. But
yeah.
like I mean, yes, you can buy cheaper polyplastics, even things like drop cloth. And I've used all of those different ones. They just don't last as long. So the greenhouse plastic has been worth the investment for me.
Yes.
But the best way to get it is if you go to a supplier, like Halifax Seed, and they have a damaged roll. Often
Yeah.
you can get it for a better price. Or you
Yes.
buy it with a group of people, like a garden club or some fellow gardeners, because they're usually at least 32 feet by 100 feet or 40 feet by 100 feet. So,
Right.
I mean, you can share a lot of that plastic with people.
Right. If you want to help support the channel and everything I'm doing here, buy your seeds and gardening supplies at bessies.com using my coupon code GAVS22. Or become a paid subscriber to my weekly column at maritimegardening.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $30 a year. It's all about gardening and a little bit about cooking, and I pump out a new article every Tuesday morning. And as a bonus for subscribing, every time I get 100 new paid subscribers, I will randomly choose one lucky winner to receive a $100 gift certificate at the online garden store of their choice. So maybe give one of those things a try. It'll help out a lot. Thanks and happy gardening.